Actually, I'm recording this shit. This is the mini Ice Age conversations with a 420 spin on it. That's why it's all colorful. Don't trip out. We're gonna do a show. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it. It's warming in my globe right now. So I'm drinking this fucking red hot lava right here. That's awesome. Look at those bubbles. Welcome to 420 TV. Well, we're not allowed to say anything, Kane. Any thinking. We're not allowed to say anything over here. Or we'll get banned. Or we did get banned. Like 5 times. 5 channels. 5 down the toilets. But you're on the Ransom Godwin channel. So, now I put my name right out there for YouTube to be a dick about everything. But, you know, we live in Orwellian times. Actually, just saying that word might get me banned from the Ministry of Truth, the fact checkers, the checkers of facts, their facts, facsimiles. However those fax machines sound, you know, I think I could pause this shit. So I could have a pause for the cause. You know what I'm saying? David Dubine's gonna call, but he's gonna sound funny like me doing an experiment, man, in the mushrooms status of the show. But not really, but really. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna talk about energies. Everybody likes the energies. Where was the pause button? Oh yeah, right here. Yeah, let's just pause it.
Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2000. And I do welcome you tonight. Please take a break, a breath. What do you think before this year so far? What has been an abundance in your life that's been given to you or you manifested? We need to focus on the positive here for just a moment. And as you can see, the world's spinning. And I am going to say right away, it's not what you think it is. The chaos that's occurring right now is a distraction. It's a distraction from cycles in time, cycles in history, cycles of our solar system, our universe, our spiral arm of the galaxy. These cycles are mapped out. They've been mapped out for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient cultures have put these into text. They've carved them in stone, put them on the sides of temples that have either been destroyed or boxed up and taken into repositories across the museums and Vatican. Oh, was that too deep? So we're at the deflection, distraction moment here versus your awareness of the change of the cycle. See, the powers that be don't want to be culpable for the situation you're in. When 20 years ago, they could have said, hey, everybody start community gardens. Hey, everybody grow your own food. You know what? We're going through another cycle, but the power control would be lost. The structure of power would evaporate in just days, weeks. So we sit at the point now where we're coming into these massive crop losses based on forecastable cycles. they don't want you pointing fingers at the global elite as to why you weren't warned, why you weren't informed about these changes. Because once you break that power structure, whatever it is, whether you're moving from central banking into cryptocurrency, whether moving into a trading and barter system in your own local communities, once lost and you understand that that works, you never go back to the old system. So Global Elite coming out in 1999 or the year 2000 to say, hey, you know what? Around 2020, the magnetic field from the sun is going to weaken, and the magnetic layering in the sun is going to cancel itself out. This is a once in a 2,000-year cycle, and the planets are going to line up also in a single quadrant of the solar system where they're going to create their own magnetic field, and there's going to be a lot of Earth crustal rifts and, strange things, pipelines and bridges won't work, and it's going to come into, well, the Earth is going to reset, and it's a cycle. Local communities will survive. Local communities that have set themselves up with their clans will survive. But see, once you have that power and you understand that local community helping itself does not need the external source except for the bare minimums. I mean, nobody's going to smelt their own iron in their backyard. They tried that in China and failed miserably in the Great Leap Forward. So some centralized production of base minerals, base metals into something more usable. A steel plant is going to do a way better production than you and a few people trying to burn some oak in your backyard and melt some metal. For sure. There's a case for centralized production of things that are incredibly high-tech. Outside of that very thin line of getting you the base construct of what you need for your communities to survive, you really don't need much else. All this hyperbole about global warming, all this hyperbole about climate change, the most of it has been spurred on by this never-ending, incessant, non-stop barrage of advertising, manipulating your psyche that you need the next greatest thing. All they did was pump factories for 20 years while they backhandedly said, oh, it's global warming, CO2. Yeah. Look how the news never stopped telling you to buy the new thing. The news reports were about the new release from the new Apple iPhone. Wow, how much metal does that take? How many mining operations does that take? How many ships does that take to bring across the ocean? See, now the whole facade is starting to break apart, and everybody's noticing it. So for those of you out there across the planet applauding what's happening in the United States, like, oh, you've been brainwashed too. If you think that's not coming your direction, all it did was give validation that the entire global supply chain is being consolidated under a globalist agenda moving forward at full speed, and nothing will stand in its way now. The other verification is that magnetic field aligning out in the outer solar system and the different layers in our sun magnetic canceling each other coming into 2024. Every resource on the planet is for governments. You're expendable as you can't even communicate with anybody to tell them how expendable you are now. This is the true reality of why all this is happening. Forget the politics. You're being blinded. Forget the race bait card. You're indoctrinated. What you don't have the knowledge of is the solar cycles and how the solar system intertwines with the plasma field increasing or decreasing its charge going across a spiral arm. That's what they don't teach you in school, nor would they. If you understand the cycles, governments have no power. Ransom, thanks for joining me tonight, man. I'm going to stop, and that's all.
Wow, you're on fire tonight. And I've been...
I'm on a commentary tale.
You're on a commentary tale. Well, that whole thing you said, I was sitting there listening to you, and I've been tripping on energy lately and how the entire universe And that includes all the different theories, the multiverse, whatever. All of reality is definitely just a bunch of energy trapped, waiting to get released. Everything from our lifespan to, like finances and everything. We have to figure out how to store the right energy and release it at the right time. And you got to think about too, all around the world right now, there's all this other energy and it's being released and it's bouncing off of you. And we're just these little capsules in time that can only hold so much energy. So we're getting overloaded with the wrong kinds of energy, and we're not storing the right kind of energy so that at the right time we could release it. We could let it go. That's what everything's about. Trapping energy and releasing it. But at the right time and the right place. Does that make sense?
It does, and I would have a challenge for you out there, everybody. Remember when the challenge thing was huge, like pour ice water over your head? The challenge. I would challenge you to walk out within the next 24 hours and take your shoes off and walk out into grass, and I don't care if it's winter. Walk out into the snow, but touch your bare feet with the earth and decompress. Because the earth will, although it's changing as well, it can feel the resonance. It will take that way, and you'll have a rebalancing, and I really feel that you will somehow recenter your thinking, recenter your psyche. Because when you talk about the extreme amount of energy, you almost have to think as the human right now is a capacitor. That's an overcharge, and it's about to blow. But if you take that extra charge away, it'll come right back in balance again. And I think 7 out of the 8 billion people are at the overcharged, almost at the edge to shatter that and blow the fuse at the moment. But stepping out inside and reconnecting with the earth, put your feet in the sand, put your feet in the soil. Peter Tosh, take us to a tropical island, man. Let us put our feet in the sand.
Yeah. It was the other day, though, what got me kind of tripping on this path of energy and looking at everything like energy waiting to be released. I was looking at all the seeds I saved, and I was thinking about the little amount of effort I did with the little amount of seeds I had. But somebody somewhere put this seed pack together, and they stored this little intent and energy in this little box. So I get the box, I open it up, I take the energy out, I put it into the earth, and then a bunch of energy gets released. And then I store all that energy. I'm talking about seeds, but it doesn't matter. You could think about it in your finances. You make a small investment, you put it in the right place, and later you get this release of energy and it comes back to you. And the same goes for knowledge. And we're all, thinking about these changes on the earth right now and what it means to us and trying to gather enough knowledge to cope with it. But all of this energy has already been stored, and we have all these historical records and different things. But when you're farming, you really get to see this process in motion. You put this energy out, you store it, you put it in, jars or whatever you're saving the seeds in. But you literally have a little jar of energy there, and you have to wait to the right time, in the right place, in the right conditions, and let it release. And a human being is just like that. So if we're sitting around absorbing all this, energy that was designed by somebody else, say social media, the mainstream media, science, propaganda, whatever it is, you're filling up with this energy, and you don't have room for the good kind of energies, like spending your time growing food or, actually educating yourself on a topic and not just, thinking you know everything because you saw 5 or 10 memes today. And plus we have these new, I don't know if I should name it, the fact checkers that are trying to stop and store all of this energy we know of as knowledge. And knowledge, the more you have of it, later on you can let that energy escape. It goes to other people, they store the energy, and then they spread it. It's just a weird philosophy thinking about storing and, releasing energy, because indeed there is no energy that will not be released eventually. So if we keep choosing when and who to release our energy to, it grows, and we can keep storing that generationally. It'll get us through this grand solar minimum where the Earth is about to release a bunch of energy.
The potential. And whether that be a human being, or whether that be the Earth overcharged as the sun steps down, that potential to release and equalize the energy. This explains a lot of the jet stream anomalies. This explains the ground to the sky lightning that's becoming more common. 10 years ago, ground to sky lightning was nearly mythical. Nearly an unprovable legend of folklore. But now it's being so commonly captured that something has definitely shifted in terms of the Earth trying to release the overcharge of the energy. And then also when you see these aurora that are white, that's a reconnection from the sun's magnetic field line releasing the energy with its particle flow down to, and then the Earth is reconnecting back up to it. And these are really low latitude, We're not even doing 50 miles up, maybe 30 miles up, and they're reconnecting with something here on the Earth. So the Earth's trying to discharge with the human resonance as well. It's your potential. So the way I'm looking at it is we come up into the 18th and 19th here in the United States. I am so excited that I have 15 different pawpaw potted root plants coming to my farm delivered by the Forestry Service, and I'm going to spend my days in the field planting my fruit trees. So for me, that's my potential. That's what I'm looking at in those days. Other people are the chaos. I'm looking to plant my fruit trees to give me more food that I can produce alcohol, medicine, and food from.
Yeah.
And that's my potential, is moving into that direction right there. On those same days that people are finding chaos, I'm finding bliss in nature and a purpose in life.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I meant there. And I know it sounded kind of woo-woo because I kept using the word energy repeatedly, but just like you're saying, right now there's a bunch of people from coast to coast that have been fed all this negative energy, and a lot of them can't contain it anymore. They've basically lost their minds to the mind control, and they're about to release the energy out there. There's a bunch of it. But you could take your time, storing your energy right now. While everybody else is releasing it, you could store it, just like you said. You could plant trees. You could start, jarring things. I just inherited a bunch of food from my grandmother, and it's amazing. There's so many cans that are expired, and I'm looking at it and I'm realizing, these canned goods are probably good for years past the expiration date, and I don't want to throw them away, so I'm just putting them in buckets and storing them. Probably never going to eat that, but it's just energy stored, and you never know whenever we'll need to release it.
Yeah, let me touch on that. That's a great point that you brought up there. 2 points I want to bring up, and they're symbiosis. The U.S. Army did a research, and it's over 1,000-page document. What they did was they looked at every storable food that they had in the Army, and they looked at every medicine that they used in the Army. This is the U.S. Army. And the whole crux of the study was to look and see how good everything was past that what you consider the expiration date. Now, most medicines are good between 3 and 5 years after the expiration date, barring anything that needs to be refrigerated, obviously. But when something like an aspirin was in a label that said, oh, goodbye or, expired at, aspirin can stay good for up to 7 years past that. And it's just these different medicines, and I encourage everybody to download that document. It's free. Just go Army, expiration date, medicine, PDF. And that's all you need to put in any search engine. And then the next one will be Army, canned goods, expiration date, PDF. And it will bring you to the entire gamut of what the U.S. Army uses for canned food, like you spoke of. And the different canned food, depending on the acidity, has a different life past what was said or printed on that can. And I encourage everybody to do a lot of research, because as we march forward, there are going to be disruptions in the supply chains. Now, it could be political, absolutely. Could be economic, more likely. Could be earth changes, almost assuredly. But whatever's going to happen, you're going to stumble across foods in the future that have an expiration date on it, and, there's going to be the conversation. Well, do you think it's safe? Should we eat it? Should we not eat it? Should we try it? What do you think? And if you have that PDF and you learn some basic foods, you're going to be fine. And you could use that to your advantage. So maybe I came across you, Ransom, and you had some of that expired food, and I said, you know what? I know for sure the more acidic foods like canned tomatoes, etc., that's going to stay good for 5, 7, 8 years past what the expiration date on it. And you offer me, all I have is these like 2-year-old expired tomatoes here. I'll give you a discount on it. And if I was really, really hungry, I would go, you know what? I remember that Army PDF document on when things were over expired, but they were still good. I'll take your tomatoes at a discount. That's in an extreme situation, but we are moving into bizarro land. And I do believe, like you said, Ransom, you hit on something really important the last show we were on. People are prepping for the immediate. They're not prepping for the long term to learn how to grow food. So a lot of people are going to run out of their supplies. They're going to get real desperate real quick. 3, 6 months. But how many people are really going for the long term? My food, my trees, my chickens, my field of rye, my buckwheat supply, everything to plant to keep going and going and going. I'm not looking at this year as just being able to get food for the next couple months. I'm looking at having enough seed to feed myself and save 25% of those 5 acres and still have enough seed to replant for the next year and the next year and the next year, and then trade and barter for something good that I can bring it in. So expired food might not be expired depending, and I'm sure everybody, and especially medicines, those are going to be so valuable. So please understand how expired medicines on the label, they're just made to sell you more, and you're going to have to buy more, and it comes right back into global warming. Yeah, well, they put the expiry date almost like 6 months or a year after everything, and minimum almost everything's good for 3 years after they put it into a can. They leave that as a standard. So something that's, expired 6 months after they put it in the can, you got to laugh at that and go, they're gaslighting you. They're making you just buy more stuff more quickly, more factories running with more CO2, more electrical uses, more delivery, and then they blame you. So what do you think about that?
I'm tired of getting blamed for everything. I never thought I would live to see what I'm seeing today. We're not even going to describe it because, I'm sure you guys have seen it. There's people in uniforms, with weapons everywhere. For what reason? I don't know. Things are being blown out of proportion to scare you out of your mind. Now back to storing energy. You were talking about all of those seeds. Today, I randomly just threw barley and a couple of other ancient grains, and I just threw them everywhere. And I'm not growing it to, cultivate it for food, however you could in extreme circumstances, especially if you got a whole field of it to grow. But the reason I'm putting it out there is to bring in the fauna and I want the animals to come in. It's the birds. I was looking out there today. I saw these new species of birds I've never seen before, and I was thinking about that too with the seeds. I'm throwing out all this stuff. All the rabbits, all of the other animals come to eat your edible plants that you have everywhere. You don't even have to eat all of that for it to produce food. It can bring in the wildlife, and people will be wondering why in certain areas all of the wildlife is gone, because one, it got overhunted right away, and then two, it's scared of people now. But in other areas, there'll be food for it to eat, and if you can control the environment and make it calm, all the animals will just come right in there. It's a trick that Native Americans were using for a long time. They would plant a lot of edibles, and they would bring in the deer and whatnot. You know, you got berries. Only problem is sometimes bears if you live in certain spots. But if you could think ahead in the long term, you're not only growing yourself food, you're feeding the environment, and then the environment feeds you. And in all these city areas, there's no edible foods growing. These cities went out of their way to make codes and ordinances where houses and different areas in their municipalities couldn't grow things that would feed the public. They went as so far as to make laws in certain cities in America where you can't even grow tomatoes in your yard if you live in the city limits. So think about that. With all these people that are so brainwashed to the point where they'll wear a mask and believe that that's the law, they'll do anything, and they have been doing anything. And that's why the city areas are just going to be hunger zones. It's going to be hell on earth. Now, I don't know what's going to cause this, like you said, political or environmental, but think about all of these different energy patterns that have been stored for a long time and are being, they're ready to be released. There's billions of people in certain parts of the world with a different philosophy than us. And then on top of that, you have all of these breaks in the ecosystem that are man-made. And then you have the supply chain distribution that's been manipulated. They've destroyed food. They've made it where you can't do business. So from the small businessman all the way to the global supply chain, a long time ago, they got everybody used to this idea that they could turn it off, but it was really for you. It's called just-in-time shipping. That means that they don't store a bunch of excess, so that you have stockpile, backup, and things could keep getting delivered. No. You wait till you absolutely just need it, then they deliver it, but only just what you need. So you always have to depend on the supply chain to do anything in business, and that goes for the food too. But if you've had a whole environment that you've planned ahead, where your ecosystem will continue to feed itself over the next couple of years, you've really done something and you've planned ahead.
Yeah, you got to think about it in a business move when things were stable and fuel prices weren't that expensive. Using the supply chain as your warehouse was kind of a brilliant upstep move there. But the food security got deleted at the same time. Because, growing up as a kid, half the supermarket was the stored food in the back. But think about the brilliance of, the thing's moving across the ocean, but then the next step, the ship size had to increase, 10x comparatively to what it was before. And when you look at the upsize in the ships and you go, how much fuel do they burn? Because you look at the bunker fuels and you see all the ship tracks all over the ocean creating climate change. You go, hey, why are you still blaming us here?
Yeah.
But moving forward with this exponential possibility of energy releases as we move through in terms of how humans are going to behave, if they don't have the food, then you can take that in any direction you want. I am of the volition that powers that be, global elite, central banking, government structures, international cooperative bodies like United Nations, etc., Bank of International Settlements, all the central banks intertwined there, they all know that these cycles are bringing in food shortages. So, food shortage is a food shortage. It doesn't matter if it's at the supply chain breakdown or if nature's not providing it. It's going to be a global event. And It can't be stopped. At this point, the only way it would be mitigated was we retool the entire economy, and you have to rethink an entire different society as we understand it right now. The money movement would stop. It would have to. It would be rediverted into local energy production using magnetic motors and coal, gas, nuclear. It's all gone. There's no more of that. It's gone. Everything's locally produced for the energy, and all the food is locally produced as well. Now, there could be some cross swaps for things that you might not be able to grow, or animal husbandry. It's better in a centralized environment up to a certain point. But you'd have to retool the entire economy to have the entire human race think in a different way than we do now. I mean, literally, you talk about Great Reset. You'd have to Great Reset the entire mind frame of what economy, what food, what power, what electricity is for everybody on the planet. Literally reframe it to the point where, you just go to the gas station and there's petrol there. And by the way, if you're listening, please go get more petrol. Buy cans. They're like $23. I paid $23 today. Where was I at? I was in Home Depot. The 5-gallon jerry cans there, although they were California type, I pulled out my knife and cut all that garbage, safety stuff out of there. Go get a 5-gallon. Go get 2, 3, 4 of them. Fill up. You need 20 gallons of gas laying around your house to refuel your car, put in your garage, because if the fuel supply chain stops, that is going to be the very first thing that runs out. Those pipelines are only full because they're full coming from the refineries. If the refinery stops, those pipelines, even if they have the compression, they're going to cut it off at places, and the fuel's going to be the first thing to run out within hours after that. Not days or weeks, or the food's going to be there way longer than the fuel will. But think about retooling your entire mind to, you don't buy electricity from an electricity company anymore. You have a magnetic motor in your house producing electricity that runs the vertical farm in your house. The LED grow lights that you're using in your house, the electricity is from your house. The food you're growing there at your own local level for whatever it would be, like you're talking about tomatoes, lettuces, anything like this green veg, is in your house for your household use. And then you can bring it out to get an enormous amount of yards together where people have a community sense in their neighborhood, not a community garden, a neighborhood garden. And then people can grow out something larger like the pumpkins, etc. You can't do vertical ag in your house to do pumpkins. That's a no-go. Watermelons, forget it. Come on. But you're going to have to rethink that entire thing. And then when you want to bring the animals into it, what do you got? You got cows, sheep, goat, rabbit, chicken. Well, there's no more supply chains. You don't need them really if you can do everything locally. And see, to retool and retrain an entire populace that went to work, it didn't take too long for them to move to the work at home thing. But to get them to understand that money won't exist anymore, that you're going to have to do everything locally, your own power will be, it's a huge mind frame that I think most people aren't able to handle. Like you talked about last episode, possible alien contact with all the release of the information, all this disclosure, 2 million pages of UFO encounters released by the CIA, available for everybody online to go peruse all the images, the sketches, the diagrams, the interview encounters, 2 million pages of that. Like, people aren't ready for that either. So to try to dump all this on a society at the same time, and by the way, we're shifting into an era that hasn't been seen for 2,000 years, and a lot of people aren't going to live through it, and then dump that on top. You can see where the distraction is. It's going to be about total control of the food supply. And I know I was going somewhere for there, but I just started rambling and I got off on a tangent. Your turn.
I've been actually trying not to pay attention to the fake reality that's going on around me, and keep my mind, non-distracted. I want to make sure that I'm storing all my energies in the right place where I can release them in the right way. So I was kind of thinking about this all the way to the idea of life and death. Not to put a bummer on anybody, but even life and death is an example of energy being stored and then it has to be released. So therefore, you could never be immortal. You have to be part of the cycle. So for a lot of people that have children, if you look what's going on, and I'm not going to get into detail, you know what I'm saying. Things are getting rough out there. Ideas are getting warped. So if you could do anything, you store energy in your children so that they know how to do the same things like grow food, pickle, jar, and interact with nature. And that's something that the Agenda 2030 and globalists have always been against, is a family unit. Not only one reason is because they know it's harder to come get people and, take them away when they have a whole village, a whole local network of people that actually care for each other and depend on each other. That's something that we had a long time ago. And I think you're right, David. We're going to have to go back to this style of living where, unfortunately, it's been destroyed and taken over the years. And that's where the local takes care of everything in the local area. Self-sufficient, the water, the food, the education, all of it. So what's happened over the years is a thing I learned in, I think, maybe 5th grade in geography, was a thing called when globalization meets localization. And that's right. They were teaching children this way back when I was in elementary school. And basically what this theory of business is so over in China, they have to fill a need. So because of that, all the way in your hometown over here in the US, you have to change something about the way you live so someone else on the other side of the planet that has nothing directly to do with you is able to do whatever it is that they're trying to do, because a global government decided that they're going to give and take and make winners and losers. They're going to pick where winners are and where losers are. And you can avoid this by storing energy where you live. There's no way that someone in China can even know really what you're doing over here. So you have control of that. But they've kind of brainwashed society into thinking that your small business has to, play by rules that were made so other people could win somewhere else. So it's a whole business model on self-annihilation. And we need to get over that here. And that's how we kind of take over politically, but that's also how we take over the resources in your local area. So actually, I do want to say one thing. You're kind of wrong about the pumpkins and the watermelons and the vertical growing, because I saw a video over in China where they solved this problem. So basically, they planted it way up at the top, and then the vines dangled off, and they made sure that the fruits were in these boxes. And then in the boxes, the watermelons grew into a square shape. It was pretty cool. Anyway, there's my ramble.
Yeah, I've seen those square watermelons before. Those were such a hit a couple of years ago. Like, they were fetching a couple $100 for each square watermelon, believe it or not.
Wow.
Because that was the thing. You want to buy a holiday, Chinese New Year, and it was a super big event. So you bring a square pumpkin or a square watermelon by, and people were like, what? A, it's out of season, and B, it's a square. Well, you were the hit of the party, right? And that's what people in China are all about, the bling bling and about the guanxi and the mianzi are having like the biggest, best reputation, like life of the party. Yeah, that's mianzi. Yeah, boiled down to a nutshell there.
Plus, it's easy to put tequila in and put a little tap, and you just stack it right on the bar there. It's flat, so you just put the tap right in there and you make some jungle juice out of it. I'm just kidding. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go with the jungle juice, man. I feel like dancing on the beach, in my bare feet, on the sand, listening to Peter Tosh, Toots and the Maytals, and maybe a little bit deep old school roots reggae. What do you think?
I think that'd be pretty cool.
Fire up the tiki torches.
I've been wondering what's going to happen to these people out on these really remote islands when the grid fails. Like those stories of the Rapa Nui on Easter Island, how, they were segregated from all of other people and they lost their boats because they had no more trees and they were just stuck on this island, segregated for like, I don't know how long, really long time. And, we show up and they're almost gone because they've been living the, post-apocalyptic life for hundreds of years already. What's Hawaii gonna look like? You know what I'm saying?
I lived in Hawaii for a while, and I tell you what, the average population of Maui and it was 20,000 at the time. Right now, about 250,000 people live on the island, or did before the COVID. The population of the island was 20,000 when Cook and the explorers came by and into the 1800s and the changeover of government there. Average people, 20,000 on the island, So, and you look at the different islands and they had different populations which are smaller. The Big Island obviously had more people because it's such a large thing. You go to the Big Island, it's 300 miles long. This tropical island, 300 miles long. There's a lot of stuff you can grow there. Super incredible rich soils.
Yeah,
but if you look at the natural carrying capacity of most of these places, it's very, very small. So when the explorers arrived out there at Rapa Nui, that was a mud flood zone. So what I can explain as a mud flood is kind of like the actual word for it is global liquefaction event.
Yeah.
So a lot of people would say, hey, it's a chemtrail, but no, that's not. It's a stratospheric aerosol geoengineering or stratospheric aerosol particulate injection. So if you frame it in that context with a scientific terminology to describe the same thing, it has a way different outcome. Because when I say it's chemtrails, 50% of the people turned off right then. But if I say, hey, did you hear about this stratospheric aerosol injection? They're going to go, no, what's that? It's the same exact thing. Just frame it differently. So when we come up to 2024, we're going to have another one of these events where the crust is going to get pulled slightly because of the second magnetic field out with the Jovians. And this is going to create a rift, and there's going to be a lot of mud and kind of oozing of sand, water, mud mixes that are going to come out of an enormous amount of places across the earth, and it's going to start burying things. Because you ask yourself, why are those statues buried up so deep, high? Those things, sometimes the mud on those things that it buries is 16 feet deep. And we're talking about 1/10 of a millimeter per year.
So you're telling
me the math doesn't add up with the timeline that we're given. It's off by 10,000 years or so. So they say the amount of natural soil gain on that island. But then when you try to divide that by 16 feet, you're like, whoa, that's 10,000 years in the past. Wait a second, you told us these things were like 1,200 years old. Man, what's going on with that? So the mud flood is a real thing. It's a liquefaction event, global liquefaction. Easter Island's a perfect example. Take a look at how those things are buried, and if you look at the locale where the GPS is for the individual statues there, the ones that are higher on the mountain are more deeply buried than the ones down near the coast, and then you could see where the flow of the mud actually went, because when it reached coastal, there's some areas of the statues that were about 3 feet deeper buried than the rest, so you can see even the direction of the flow and the depth of the flow. And you can see this routinely across the entire planet in all these ancient historical sites that they say, society built on top of society, and you can trace it back to the direction of the flow and the thickness of the flow. So whoever was left after that, come back to that back to that point again, when the explorers arrived, those people had lived through a global liquefaction event. Their carrying capacity was wiped down to pretty much what they could get out of the sea, seaweeds, fish, and what they could build for rudimentary structures, which were stone, by the way. And then there was very little vegetation, so for them to start farming, hopefully a bird would have flown from the mainland, caught in a hurricane, and then dropped some seeds on the island. Otherwise, what was the carrying capacity? How many people were there, Ransom? Do you know when the explorers arrived, how many people lived on Rapa Nui? 200?
They were down to less than 1,000, I thought. They were hiding from each other. They had little caves. There was evidence of cannibalism. They chopped every tree down. There was nothing left. They were on the, like they've been living post-apocalyptic for some time.
And how do you think our society would fare in such an event?
Yeah, it's really weird. But I was going to ask you something. So you's telling me that the government wants to vaccinate the atmosphere and my arm? No, I'm just kidding. But speaking of these mud floods, I was listening to you on one of your shows talk about mud floods, global liquefaction event, and it brings to mind like Noah and the flood, right? So they're talking about a big flood of water, and I know in the past, like in the Black Sea, the whole area that's the Black Sea used to be dry land, and because of the elevation difference, it held back the sea. But at one time, for whatever reason, it just, poured into the Black Sea and filled that up, and there were people living in there and stuff. And then another example of probably the same event at the same time as Rapa Nui is, the Pumapunku. You go out there and you see those giant, perfectly cut blocks, and it's sitting on a mud pillar because it floated along an avalanche from, probably Lake Titicaca right there, and it just pushed over. But something, it seems like globally just shifted, like boom, and everything moved and mudslides happened. I was wondering what would happen if it went in the other direction that it seems to have happened last time. So instead of California having a big, liquefaction event and going off in the Pacific, what if the Appalachians shook and all of the areas that had between 0 and 5 foot above sea level, like say Washington DC, just got covered in a bunch of mud, and then the grid failed. You would come back to this area in a couple hundred years, and there would be all these giant statues with just the forehead or maybe the head poking out, obelisk where only the little pyramid sticking out at the top. Could you imagine that whole city just covered in mud that came down from the Appalachian Mountains trying to level out with gravity, and it would go out towards the Atlantic? And imagine how many times these events have happened. So we know that they've happened in Egypt, where there's sunken cities, but they know the ocean didn't rise there. So what happened? It just slid right off into the Mediterranean. So what shook the earth that much?
If I could add a little bit to that, the land itself sank, and then other areas rose. So when we come into 2024, we're going to start to see more of this. So I am absolutely of the volition that 2021 is going to be the year of the landslide. And see, this is the beginning of the tug on the Earth's crust that verifies and validates that we're coming into this ellipsoid pull. And some areas are going to slip. Some areas are going to break open. And, the thing about the Noah's flood is there's scientific fact behind it. It's in every culture across the planet. Beyond that, just leave that as a side.
Yeah.
Just mathematically understanding there's 3 times more water in the Earth's crust than there is in all the oceans, lakes, and rivers on the surface. So everything from the Nile River to the Mississippi River, the Pacific Ocean, the Great Lakes, everything you understand in terms of water on the surface of the planet, there's 3x more under the planet, in the crust. So if it were to rip open, how much water could ooze out or spring out and shoot out of the actual crust? There's an enormous amount of possibilities, and how close is that? And Deborah Tavares, who I had a chance to speak with, talks about primary water, where some of these huge, gigantic reservoirs are very near the surface. And if you can tap into one of those, you could have a never-ending freshwater supply. I would say Libya. So I encourage all of you to look out at the Great Desert Irrigation Project. They were on top of one of the primary water sources for the planet. And Gaddafi was trying to bring out, and he did actually, they started to irrigate, what was it, like 1,000 square kilometers in the desert from using the water that was in the Nubian Aquifer there. But these areas exist around the planet. So if we come into an ellipsoid Earth and then we get all these earth cracks and there's mudslides and landslides and the Earth's getting pulled into an ellipsoid, sort of an egg shape, and then, the crust rips open 1 or 2,000, 3,000 feet deep at a time of this event, and then water starts spurting out, the magnetic field collapses off the gas giant's coupling, and then the Earth suddenly retains its more circular shape again, and all those voids reseal themselves. So then what would you find in Washington, D.C.? Well, you'd find only after, let's say, 200 or 300 years, all the iron would have rusted away. All the glass would have broken and shattered. All the plastics would be totally gone. The only thing you would find are the stone buildings that we still see, like the Capitol building, the Lincoln Memorial. Yeah. And what would they do? They would dig that out, and that would suddenly become a place of mystic, whatever you would term it as.
Well,
today, when they found it from the last prior time, they turned them into universities and libraries and in places like we see government seats now. I think they just took over the old government seat of what was wiped out the last time, and it just continues cycle after cycle. Because they all have the same building techniques. It's always, Greek pillars. We assign it to an age, Greek pillars. Well, who's to say that's true? But if it was buried and you found it, you would dig it out, and then it would be something spectacular. But after 300 years, almost everything else would be gone. If it wasn't stone, it's gone. There's really nothing that lasts. Everything would have rusted. And if you can think of any other metals that would survive 300 years of saltwater, floods, erosion, and just, earth building, how much stuff's buried? Because I talked to a couple guys who are working on road building crews, because I'm really interested in, in East Tennessee, and they have said to me, you know how many times we need to stop our construction because we find something in the archaeological whatever bureau and different people need to come out and take a look at it before we can continue? It's like it happens almost every day when we're digging and cutting roads into places. And I said, are you kidding me? Every time you guys go out and start digging through the mountains and like cutting roads in and clearing out big parcels of land to flatten for like a Walmart warehouse or something, that you stumble across things? And he says, yeah, all the time. All the time. Hidden history for sure. I would love to be on a road crew, man. Can you imagine the kind of stuff they find in excavator crews? And these kind of people who are moving an enormous amount of earth, these kind of real, that's why it's in Halliburton's hands. They're the big earth movers. What do they find? You think you'd hear about that in the news?
Probably not. You know what will last a long time past the metals is the layout. The layout of DC, as you know, has a lot of sacred geometry and magical numbers in it, if you want to call that. The whole layout, because, and then also think about this. We find, like the red ochre people, or, you can get into the Solutrean hypothesis if you want, but just say they were Native Americans, the red ochre people, or the red paint people, excuse me. That's the red paint people. But anyway, they made these little, graves areas, and they put that red ochre all over them. And I always wondered what that does to the electromagnetic field around it, because, it has a bunch of iron in it. And this stuff has lasted for 7,000-8,000 years here in the Americas, and that didn't even have any kind of fancy construction around it. It was just some rocks and some bones. So when people dig up this stuff in like DC or whatever, say it got covered in flood, they would know that the people that put it there were trying to put these sacred geometries into it. And it makes me wonder if that's exactly why they designed the city on the coast that way, so that no matter what happens, they'll have these little sacred geometries as above, so below. And then think about Georgia, where they put these guidestones up. I don't know if that's like a joke from a really rich person, but it aligns itself with what they've told everybody is conspiracy theory now. And when you think about the age we're really in, we're about to be shut off talking about any subject, whether it's science, history, whatever. They're telling people that they can't say certain things right now, getting you used to not being able to converse and give each other information. So when we go into this new age, nobody's ever going to be able to, share that events are happening in real time, because they already have a real-time censorship system. In all of these mud floods, just think about it. All of these cities that are built on the side of mountains and along the coastline, well, you can get even deeper than that. If you took out a map of the United States and you just filled in all the major metropolises, and then you put a clear map that only has dots where earthquakes or hurricanes or mud floods or, any of this stuff happens, you would find that whoever designed America and most of the cities in the world, they always design it where the major metropolises, not their nice country homes where most of the politicians kind of live most of the time, but in the city centers that will be destroyed in a natural disaster. They're all like that. I mean, think about it. Miami, Tampa, Houston, Fort Worth, all of that stuff, they're tornado zones or hurricane zones, or you go out to California and there's earthquakes. You go to the coast up there in the Northwest and you have a volcano next to every major metropolis. It's like we're designed to completely collapse when the earth wakes up, and all of this trapped energy has to be released in the form of, earth changes, volcanic weather patterns, and then just the simple fact that if our magnetic sphere is collapsing, just like the sun, sooner or later it's going to be making these bands that come out, and then they're going to snap. And we see that in the form of weird weather patterns.
Yeah, the fact is that the changing weather patterns from this point forward are going to be so severe and so extreme that it's not going to be hideable anymore. See, I think when we went to that great conjunction, or with Jupiter and Saturn, it wasn't just a conjunction that we saw with the two planets in the sky. It was a magnetic mark in time. So now what's happening is those two magnetic fields are starting to couple with each other, along with Uranus and Neptune, to create a much more stronger magnetic field each day forward. So that was the crossover point where that extra magnetic field on our solar system is going to start to wreak havoc with we're going to see day after tomorrow type events happening through 2024. Now see, governments are going to need to control this because the food's going to be affected because of this. So we come back to this as above, so below, and we start to see where all these cities designed to be erased. Because I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who does energy work. And as we were talking, I said, wow, this is crazy because, we started talking, I always am of the volition that there was a previous society at least as great as ours during the last interglacial from the last ice age, going 4 ice ages back to 500,000 years ago. Every 10,000 years, we get this reprieve and this warm period. Because the Earth's state is 90% of the time in ice, 10% of the time in the warm. But the thing is, the human has been the same. This Homo sapiens sapien has been the same about 500,000 years. Even 400,000 years, okay? That's 4 interglacials. So what has happened for those 10,000 year periods with the same thinking capacity as we have? But nobody ever wants to talk about that. So that was the conversation that I started with Michael, and he was saying, you know what? This whole thing has been going on for millions and millions of years. This Great Reset is just another rodeo. This whole thing coming in from the warmth into a cooler period and then stepping down into the glacier. There's some other race spin here, and it's a million-year process. Nothing new. We're in another ring of the rodeo, round 2. Here with Ransom Godwin, 420 TV. I'm your host, David Devine, as well. We'll be back in 2 minutes, 2 seconds right after this break. Thank you right here, Revolution Radio Studio A, every 10 p.m. Every Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight. Great time.
Was ist das? On the radio! They can't see you! Oh, yeah, I get confused. Want to learn more about the Marxist agenda and other important stuff? Listen to The Ultimate Remedy with L.P. Ward, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Revolution Radio.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. That Nightlight provides you with equal measure of light, love, and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio A, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Very kind of the applause listening in the background. Yay! I'm here with Radio Guy 420 TV. And myself, David Devine, Adapt 2030. With the free speech, as you see, being stifled across the planet, it's more important than ever to keep venues like this right here at Revolution Radio online. And I was really surprised to see more websites getting cut out at the heels. You know, going after what you're saying and posting on the Twitter or on the Facebook, okay. But now they're disagreeing with what you're actually writing on your website. So like, well, that's bad thought. That's incorrect thought on a website, so we need to remove your entire website too. And so this is really starting to happen here more and more. So as we correctly move through these next, I'm going to say 6 months to a year, I think freedomslips.com is going to be one of the last places on air for us to compare information like this. If everything goes down, like myself, I started my Telegram feed. Anybody can join me there at Adapt 2030. So for me, I'm trying to have an East Tennessee broadcast station of the news around here or events. So if something happens, then we can compare information from other stations across the U.S. So I am doing the East Tennessee feed. If anything unusual or strange happens, like I talked about the Knoxville Airport, there was a government airplane that came in, one of the blue and white ones with a government seal on it, into the private air hangar. Nobody had ever seen that before. It was the first time, and it was in Knoxville, Tennessee, of all places. So these kind of events I was posting on there and talking about, you know, if anything unusual happens, I want to be, you know, be able to post something on there and warn others that, you know, at least if we're cut off in this area. So Adapt 2030 over on Telegram if you want, and then freedomslips.com right here to keep this on air, because these are the kind of the, you know, the ham radios, if you will, of our society that are going to be left. Internet radio broadcast stations and your own ham radio, by the way, you should get one of those. Everybody needs an AM FM radio. And then, you know, Telegram encrypted, but I'm going to think that they're going to start to go after encrypted apps here pretty soon. That would be my next thing, because you can still communicate, and that's the whole thing about knocking out communication. So as we were saying before the break, I was talking to a friend of mine, Michael, and I was explaining that during the last interglacials, there had to have been humans that created a society that came up to vast, amazing technologies as well. Now, with the magnetic resonance field in the sun during that time, they perhaps would have been more in tune with nature, less in tune. They might have been more Borg than we are now. We're moving into the Borg. But they might have been more on the more enlightened side, where things were for the benefit of humanity. You know, we've had 5 of these chances now through the last 500,000 years. I was talking to Michael, and he's like, you know what? No. There's bigger controllers going on. This thing has been going on for millions and millions of years. So we started talking about the legend of the Hopi and the ant people, and then different types of hollow earth. And, you know, Ransom, you talked about this big cities on the surface of the planet. If there was a cataclysm or if there was some kind of liquefaction event, a lot of the cities would, you know, shake, and mountainside cities would disappear, and there'd be floods and land subsidence, and areas that are now would sink under the ocean, and other areas would rise out. But if you were under the crust, say, you know, 300 miles deep or a couple 100 miles deep in areas that don't have that shake with them, you'd have millions and multi-million-year-old societies that had never changed. And the way he framed it to me was, this rodeo's gone on many a time before. Because the people are waking up to understand that these changes are imminent and they're here, and they're going to be directing their anger toward the power structure because they weren't warned. So now instead of that happening, they're putting all these distractions out. So you put the distraction on each other and all this, you know, release of energy like you talked about on top of each other, versus the true problem, which was the power structure that was formed over the last couple 100 years that didn't warn you of these changes. They're going to be undeniable. I mean, we're going to go into day after tomorrow type storms starting from right now. And Ransom, I want to keep you with me here. Anything to add to that? Because you started me on that point, and then we got into the break there. But, you know, this whole rodeo of going on of this seems to have been done many times before, and so perfectly planned and so perfectly executed that it wasn't like the first time that they're befuddling and just fuddling through it and trying as they go, that it's been done multiple times before. And it's just another iteration in the same thing, but with technology this time.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about that, everybody knows about these codexes from the Mayan Codex, right? And then they had the Dresden Code and all that. But I believe that the whole idea of those calendars ending in the year 2012 is complete misdirection. I think those calendars, it's hard to imagine that they would just stop. So they got 52,000 years worth of, internal clockworks of the solar system. And by the way, I wanted to get to the point, we were talking last time about the blue Kachina and how it'd show up on a winter solstice, right? And then we just had the winter solstice on the 20th with the Great Conjunction. And by the way, who comes up with these names? The Great Conjunction, the Great Reset. But these are little markers in times that I don't believe that these codex, the Mayans, or any of them didn't warn us about. I think actually they did warn us about it, and there was a massive cover-up about certain informations of this time period. And bear with me for a minute, because I think there's plenty of warnings out there, even though they tried to cover up these codexes. So here on the 20th of January, we're going to have another one of these weird conjunctions where you got Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury flying by. Right on January 20th, again this month, another weird thing in the sky. So I know for a fact not a fact, I guess, but judging by their culture, judging by their calendar, that these events would have been marked down and predicted because they've already happened within the cycle of what they were keeping track of. So why did they get rid of it? I don't know, but you can find remnants of these warnings in different places. Like in the Bible, Jesus would talk about beware of the water bearer, right? So that's a little thing in the Bible telling you to beware of the Aquarius time. And even if you did stop at the 2012 point, think about all the changes that have happened since 2012. Indeed, a new cycle started and everything became totally upside down, backwards and different. But that's how they got to distract us all, is instead of learning history and paying attention to the warnings that they gave us, we've been paying attention to fake reality. So think about it. If we were sitting around here educated people, we would know, oh, look, there's, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. That means that we need to start overtime storing food because the weather's going to change. Or maybe we should move out of this land and move to a different land because there's a sign in the sky that tells me this volcano is probably going to be active in the next couple of decades. So we need to move, I think this information was out there already. And that's what you've been seeing when you see this destruction of history. Like we recently saw certain groups in the Middle East go around and destroy some of the oldest human history, oldest human documented history. So cuneiform text and statues and monuments and holy places on ley lines were all getting dynamited. They were using bombs to blow them up. And they've been doing this pattern for quite some time. That's why I think over in Pumapunku and areas like that in Peru and Bolivia, they're not worried about it because they know it's a more poor society and they can keep out foreign interests from coming in there and digging. So all you got to do is say, no digging, so no one will discover any new stuff there, and they're not worried about it. But some of the most sensitive information that was being dug up out of our past to warn us about the changes was immediately, bombarded with instability, war, famine, all of this stuff to keep people out of the area, keep society where it's not at a point where they could dig up and have time to study the past. Instead, they're worried about, food shortages and distribution collapses and real world problems like government shifting and, war. Because it looks like we're about to face a new era of that type of thing again with recent management changes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think you're referring to everywhere that was a cradle of civilization.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to look at, just go onto any search engine and look at a map, cradle of civilization. You'll find one in the Middle East, you'll find one over in the Indus Valley, Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of India. And it's really interesting how those are the most unstable areas on the planet. Now see, with the astrology, when you're looking at Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury, you have to think about the astrology is mapping the human emotion. And for those of you out there who do study solar dynamics, Mercury, for some reason, has this nullifying effect to stop sunspots. It's a proven science. Nobody can explain why. It's such a tiny little planet, made mainly of iron. It's like a little iron BB running around the sun there. But for some reason, when the kill shot, quote unquote, solar flares are coming into range in front of the Earth, when Mercury swings by there, it knocks the charge off of them and smooths out that magnetic field so they don't get those Hyder flares or you don't get those massive CMEs. And they find this again and again and again and again and again, that Mercury has some effect as like an Earth protector, if you will. It really cuts down the magnetic field and interlooping of the sunspots and the positive and negative polarities there on the umbras. So think about the gas giants, the two largest magnetic fields outside the sun, with that particular small iron ball running through that knocks out magnetic fields on the sun. All lining with the Earth and lining up, and that thing, the 20th is going to be something, if you can tap into the human emotion, that's one thing, but the true electromagnetism generated or nullified by the intercoupling of those, because you got to think it's like a Rubik's Cube, right, or some kind of a combination lock, like a slot machine. Eventually you're going to get those perfect combinations where everything's going to unlock. And the effects will begin to not only pronounce, but they would not only be a 10x, but like a 100x. So who says that, those giant magnetic fields mixed with this, with the sun decoupling in its thing right now, is going to have some massive blowout effect. See, and if you're going to map astrology, you're mapping human emotion. But then when you're looking around the precession of the equinox is when we're going through, like you said, the water bearer. That has a frequency of energy with it. And you're talking about displacement or release of energy. Like when you go around the zodiac, each different zodiacal sign has its own energy assigned to it. Taurus. Why do we have that phrase of a bull in a china shop? Do you think that just came around by accident, or do you think it was associated with the energies of Taurus? And the lion, Leo, which is really interesting because I talked about this last program. When you're looking at the precession of the equinoxes in that 25,750 year cycle, when you're going around that, where we sit right now coming into Aquarius is that if you go 180 degrees across that circle, it's Leo. So when you're looking at that balancing energy, go, wait a second, Leo, the whole Sphinx, the whole thing with the Egyptians, and then we sit on the complete other 180 side of it in this whole, like cataclysm cycle. We're at the cusp of something huge, and governments are trying to cover it up and deflect everybody with all this other distraction that you're seeing. But what you really should be focused on are the Earth changes, the Earth energies, and I should say solar system energy changes, and how that's affecting not only us, but the ability to grow food. And if you can't grow enough food, your society is going to revolt on the government in power. And see, this is where the distraction is. They could blame all of the disruptions as the reason for not enough food. Or they can do what I think they're going to do also is blame the disruptions and then control the food, because you're going to have to go into a supermarket, but people are going to be unruly, so they're going to have to do rationing, and you're only allowed in supermarkets at one time. Because I just did this story yesterday, where in the UK, Tesco and Asda supermarkets, not only do they won't sell you food if you're not wearing a mask, nobody will check you out. If you're not wearing a mask, they will literally not let you in the store, and if you take off your mask in the store, they will not ring up your groceries. But at the same time, the next point was, they want everybody to shop alone. So see, that comes back to the family. One ration card for one family, one person goes buys the thing per week. So, it's going to this whole loop, and you can clearly see where it's moving to. And the energies of the stars are the energies on the earth. And thank you for bringing that up, Branson. I'm really curious. I didn't know about the Mercury conjunction with Saturn and Jupiter coming up on the 20th. And, that's going to be a pivotal day of energy anyway for change on the planet.
Yeah, January 20th. I was thinking about it, like I almost have this weird picture in mind because you've been showing me this picture of the 24th. I think it's the 24th, right? In October. Let me look at the picture real quick. Maybe not. Yeah.
Yes, it's October of 2024. That's where everybody's radar needs to be focused on that planetary alignment. When the magnetic field of the four gas giants is so strong, it's creating a second magnetic field in addition to the sun, and the Earth is in the middle of it. Being tugged from two directions with two magnetic fields in our solar system. It only happens once every 2,000 years.
Let me break this down for you, because I think I cracked the code here. With this conjunction coming up, it made me think, in the Greek and Roman pantheon of gods, who are the strongest next to the sun? Well, that would be Jupiter and Saturn, obviously with their respective names for each culture. But think about this. Right now, you're going to look up in the sky on January 20th. It's a great, obvious time of change in more ways than one. But think about who Mercury is. Mercury is the messenger. So that these two powerful gods out there that are in the sky are getting a message to Mercury, and by 2024, Mercury will be on the other side of the sun, delivering that message to the sun. We're stuck in between it, and between the two, powerful planets and Earth is Mars, which is the god of war, and Venus, the god of love, is way on the other side of the sun, out of our, perspective at that time period. So just think about this weird little message that's being sent from the powerful gods out there, or the planets, and it's going to come around to this 2024 time, and Mercury and the message and love are hidden on the other side of the sun. Meanwhile, the powerful gods and Mars are all facing us on the other side, away from the sun. And, like I said, beware of the water bearer, which is Aquarius. Big changes in all the ancient cultures. Tried to warn us about it. I think modern academia and science has tried to hide it from us, but it's like even the planets right there in the sky, without any ancient knowledge, are kind of sending you a message that you can interpret and get ready for events to come. Is that too woo-woo for you?
No, it's not, because Mercury being on the other side of the sun, it's not going to block any of the CMEs that would come ripping out. So for me, I'm really curious how this is going to play out in terms of energetic flow from the sun through the Earth, through Mars, and over into that second magnetic field of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, creating its own magnetic field in a square out there. Yeah. So think about that. If you have two magnets, if you put a piece of iron or iron dust in between them, iron fragments, if you will, and you can keep them separated so they don't actually snap to the magnet, and you start moving that magnetic field around, that iron dust starts playing and moving in amongst itself, right? So what's going to happen when we have two magnetic fields, no canceling planets in between it, and it's really a whole other magnetic field out in the outer solar system that's only 2 planets away from Earth, and then we have the sun, which will be no planets, and it'll just be sun, Earth, Mars, other magnetic field. So when they talk about bolts of lightning like Zeus's thunderbolts,
Yeah.
this would be a time that you could expect, when I say this, no kidding, like space lightning, rods from God, space lightning coming down, striking the planet, and ripping out a plasma bolt the size of the Grand Canyon as the lightning strike area.
Would that look
This
like an
kind of
alien
earth
attack?
change. What's that?
Would that look like a alien attack? I mean, these giant bolts coming from the sky, and you got the governments telling you, hey, we tried to tell you, we disclosed all the information, and look, we need, total cooperation. Wear your mask, wait in line, one person at a time, get your universal basic income and get your little ration, because lightning bolts, literally, from God, are coming down in the atmosphere, quite alien, and we need super cooperation so that we can transition to this time. Thank you very much for your cooperation. This has been the Ministry of Truth. Thank you.
But you're not allowed to be outside to see and witness it all.
No, then you
Stay
might
indoors.
ask questions.
That's my whole thing. I want to see that thing live from a mountaintop and just watch the skies with the plasma glyphs, and I want to watch these ancient canyons come to life in front of me with the plasma displays, because it's going to get to this point, and that's the distraction right now. Where we're heading is canyon walls coming to life with plasma displays in our skies in less than 3 years. Like, how do you as a government control the populace at that point? And you understand where we're at this point right here, and how they're going to try to manipulate, control, grab the rest of the resources available to pull into their bunkers and underground, whatever continuity of government spots. How do you think in 3 years we're going to go from where we are now, where jet streams are falling? Do you realize people are skiing down the streets in Madrid right now, cross-country skiing in Madrid in Spain? It's snowing across the Canary Islands to where it's at the beaches with snow right now. It's snowing in Taiwan. It snowed in Vietnam. It could snow in Sao Paulo sometimes, but the depths of the snow went so far down it was covering the rice fields, the terraced rice fields. Like, there was a fallout. The coldest ever recorded temperature in Spain last week, 34 degrees Fahrenheit, below zero. Japan, so many hundreds of stations breaking their all-time record snow records ever going back 300 years last week and the week before. They're getting 10, 12 feet of snow in Japan. It's starting to fall out to the point where it's noticeable to everybody on the planet now. And how do you, as a government, keep people distracted enough where they're not going to ask questions? Because this whole thing, snow would be a thing of the past, does not fly. And this whole thing about CO2, wait a second. The entire planet's infrastructure and economy and transportation system has been ripped out at the knees, and there has been very little, such a minute amount of CO2 pumped into the atmosphere in this last whole year, yet there's still things increase. It doesn't make sense anymore. We decrease the CO2 and whatnot, and there's no lag. People are starting to ask questions now, truly, what the narratives. So the next purge is going to be the climate stuff like I talk about. Right now it's politics. But with things that Ransom and I are talking about tonight, give it another 6 months or a year, and I think they're going to target that, because we can explain the food shortages. We can explain the distraction why these cycles are happening again.
Yeah.
We're left on our own, and the supply chain is being consolidated into a global fashion where all resources on the planet can be given into the hands of few for government continuity, and we're left on the surface, which brings you back to Michael's thing, like, this has been going on for millions of years, so it's just the next rodeo, and they obviously need to know what they need to survive. So, you don't count, I don't count, we're not going to be invited down in there, so prepare the best you can for long-term survival. So whatever you grow now, whatever you produce now can produce more the next year, and then the next year, and then the next year, and teach us skills and get people around you that think the same way and don't have those same skills to grow for the next year, and the next year, and the next year. Ransom, you're welcome on my ranch, man.
Well, two things I wanted to point out because I'm trying to bounce off what you're talking about. I like talking to you because you throw in real events, and I want the audience to know I'm just, I'm not saying these things are all realities. I'm spitballing possibilities. And a minute ago you were talking about these plasma discharges, that maybe human beings in the near future would get to see these plasma bolts. Now, think about what this means for a minute. I want to take you around the world for a minute, and I know you know what I'm talking about, and that's what I'm saying. I kind of talk in these riddles because I know smart people know what I'm actually talking about. But anyway, so let's travel around the world.
Wait, can I stop you? Ransom, can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Ransom is an archaeologist who does field research, visits spots across the entire southwest U.S., goes into canyons that are not in any guidebook, invited onto private Native American lands, private lands, into private areas, and private landholders to witness these and take photos with the canyons, do documentaries on this, and this is his speciality, and that's the reason I wanted to frame this, so when he talks, you understand that he is an expert at what he does, and where he's been, it's getting into the borderline, a special club of what he's seen, and very few people on this entire planet have seen as many petroglyphs as he has. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, well, on top of that, I wouldn't call myself an expert. I'm just somebody that goes out and looks at stuff and asks questions myself. But to get back to this plasma thing, so I'm going to take you around the world for a minute. Go ahead.
I said you're humble.
Yeah, so if we're in Machu Picchu, you go up to the top of Machu Picchu, and what do you find? You find this angled quartzite, super big stone that's at the peak of where their civilization was, really. The elevation's like way up there. I don't know what the exact feet is, but it's at the top of where they planted on these massive terraces. They got these megalithic stones surrounding it. It's a big old temple. But the center point, the main focus of it, is literally the peak of the mountain. It's not a block. It's a quartzite stone that's literally the tip top of the mountain. Now let's travel around the world to other places. Mount Olympus. You know the stories of Zeus and his lightning bolts, and they're, hitting the top of the mountain. I could take you here to Three Rivers, where the petroglyph site is, and there's pictures of what they call the Mountain of the Gods here, which is Sierra Blanca, with lightning bolts hitting the top of it, and I've actually witnessed this. But all around the globe, think about the places that are built with obelisks, Egypt, Angkor Wat, all of these places, Pumapunku, you could go everywhere, up at these high elevations, or at least the highest point in the area where they're at. And there are all these quartzite stones that you can imagine just getting zapped all the time with plasma discharges. And indeed, when you go to these places, you find this. You go to Pumapunku, you go to, I forgot how to say it, Oyete Tambo. I probably said that wrong, but anyway, there's these megalithic blocks that are melted, like some kind of plasma just melted it down. You go to Egypt at the Anwar Providence, where they dig up these giant people that are obviously older than the dynastic Egyptians, and they're these big pharaoh type things, and you can see that they're busted and melted with high heat. Something melted them, and it had to be so hot, something like plasma from the sun or giant lightning bolts. So, and then I also wanted to point out something you said, and this is a little more serious to right now. You were talking about CO2 and how, for the last couple decades and right now, the whole global government is cracking down on CO2 for this alleged global warming that's going to happen. Now, when you reflect what's going on in our nation right now, there's a certain type of people that are getting demonized, vilified, and they're being called names that probably don't fit them. But anyway, in the future, they're going to have these agencies going around wanting to fine people for releasing CO2 or having too much CO2 or too big of a carbon footprint. So this particular group of people that's out there that's being demonized, a big portion of them are the nation's farmers and people that grow food. So when this global government comes in and labels them these names that they've been doing, and you've been seeing it, they're going to say not only are they that type of bad guy, but they're CO2 bad guys because they have vertical grow houses and they're growing, strawberries or squash or whatever it is, but they have all these plants and they're using this toxin, this poison that's destroying the earth, CO2. Don't worry, it's not plant food, it's poison. And these are eco-terrorists that are growing food in massive, little spots, putting off all this CO2, they need it. They're terrorists. They're advocating the use of CO2. So they're growing all these plants and they're going to say, hey, look, they got pigs and cows and they're putting on CO2 and they're promoting people to think CO2 is okay by growing all this food, because it's not plant food, it's a toxin. And then that's the world you're going to be living in while lightning bolts are, bouncing off all the peaks next to the cities where you live. Maybe too woo-woo. Two different ideas I threw there. I'm sorry.
Well, first to start off and say, Ransom is one of the preeminent researchers of plasma petroglyphs on the planet, and the amount of raw footage that they have over the, what would you say, thousands of hours in the field that you've done in different canyons across the planet, well, I should say the southeast or southwest U.S. that nobody goes to see.
Yeah,
you understand what's in those. You understand what's in the writings there. I mean, you don't sell yourself short. I mean, you're one of the preeminent researchers of this type of information that combines, celestial cycles with what's witnessed on the canyon walls, which were true events in the skies that come back in a cyclical pattern again.
I mean, we all know Slaughterman.
Yeah.
And Jacob's Ladder, and you could go almost in any valley where people were living thousands of years ago in the Southwest, and what you're going to find is depictions of giant lightning bolts, Jacob's Ladder, centipedes, squatter man, and all of these weird, anthropomorphic beings that are obviously not meant to represent human beings. And then there's other types. There's alien types of people, that they put. And in these same places, there's also different kinds of humans. So I know you know about the idea of, I wouldn't say forced evolution, but explosions of evolution because of cosmic rays and changes in cycles. So you got all these people with 6 toes, 6 hands. There's, all of these depictions of electromagnetism going nuts in the sky. I'm sure it was weird to wake up and see a giant purple, green, red man dancing in the entire sky.
With 2 white eyes, because, if you look at think about everything that we see in auroral displays in terms of color, from the purples, like you mentioned, the greens, the whites, the reds, and everything. But it wouldn't be at the polar region. It would be much closer to the Earth's surface. I mean, even all the way down to the equator. And the interaction electrically would be something to behold, especially if it was over a heavy, say, metallic deposit in the Earth's crust. So, Great Lakes would have had some of the most amazing displays because there's an enormous amount of iron ore and bauxite aluminum up there. So I think they would have been more in the cataclysmic type of area. I think those bolts would have the electricity would have connected directly into that planet. So I don't know how much survival rate there would have been around a heavy iron ore deposit that's the size of, 100 square miles. I think flows would have been coming into that. And you almost have to ask yourself, in some of these areas where we have these super heavy deposits in the Earth's crust of whatever metal it would be, was that because the Earth just kind of was liquid one day and it turned into that over millions and millions of years? Or was it sort of an instant thing where plasma hit it, it liquefied, and all those elements came together and re-gelled in, and whether it would have been in a cooling phase of a matter of hours, seconds for the molecular structure to break everything down and liquefy it, and then bring those constituent parts and atoms back into, the same, you get these areas in the crust that make no sense on how dense it is. Like, how do you really put that much density of a metal in one little tiny piece of the crust? You think if things were forming as they tell you how a star forms and how planets formed, everything was just like a bunch of gas and a bunch of dust out there, and it formed into a ball, and then eventually it got hot, and then eventually squeezed in, and gravity formed somehow, who knows, and then it squeezed in, and it became a circle, and then we're living on top of it now. And that's basically what kids are told in 3rd grade. But if that's true, then all the metallic material would have been dispersed evenly throughout the Earth's crust. It would be like a uniform crust, uniform density, but we don't get that. But what's interesting is the canyons that you've studied so highly and so just intensely in your life, these are the survival spots. So it seems like, learn from the past. People that were living in canyons or on backsides of mountain ranges seem to live through this, whether it be 300 mile an hour, 400 mile an hour winds or whatever. People live through these events that are coming in 2024. So it's not like, it's the end of the world. No, it's the end of our economy as we know it. Like a lot of digital, central bank stuff's not going to be around. Supply chains are not going to be around if you got plasma volts running across the Earth's surface. It'll be a reset in many ways, shapes, and forms, but learn from the past. Where did people survive? Because if you didn't survive, you wouldn't be, chipping this stuff on the walls of canyons going, we need to let people know what we saw so when they see it again, they can jump to the canyon once again.
It might sound fantastic to think about lightning bolts hitting stuff all the time, or plasma and these kind of things in the view of man. But there's a place in the U.S. that you can kind of prove, without a doubt, with common sense, that this was one of those places. And, let's use Serpent Mound, Ohio, for example. It's a giant snake mound, but what's weird about it, it's right on the edge of this giant impact crater that has an unusually high amount of heavy, metals like iron and all kinds of stuff like that. There's nickel but there's a weird magnetic thing that happens there. And at one time, right at the serpent's head, was a giant obelisk, a megalithic stone. Now, since whenever they had it there, it's fell down the hill, but it's still there. But it used to be up in the serpent's head. And at one time, I'm sure, plasma hit this. And it was kind of like a lightning rod right next to a bunch of veins of nickel and iron that are a deposit from an asteroid. But what you were saying about how the metal's not uniform, if you think about anybody that's ever done welding, when you're going down the spot where you're welding it together, especially if you're using, a MIG welder or a TIG welder or something like that. So you're using electricity and it's melting these metal. And if you pay attention, these little globulates pop off when the energy is released, right? So you get these little balls of iron and, whatever the welding material is that pop off while you're doing it. And think about the Earth. It has these little deposits and then it's getting zapped. And then these big balls show up and then you get this big deposit. And think about every vein that they've ever discovered. What's the pattern that they're in the mountain? They're in these little lightning bolt type, patterns in the Earth. So think about if electricity went through the whole Earth, it would be popping out at all over the planet in these veins of gold, iron, anything that's conductive to electricity. And indeed, when you go back to some of the ancient tales, like say the Anunnaki tale of when the planet of the crossing hit Tiamat, so you got Nibiru, and it talks about ripping open Tiamat where the veins of gold were visible in space, I guess, But they also talk about these giant lightning bolts going between the planets, even after it had collided. So we have so much history that talks about this exact thing. So it's not so far-fetched that human beings were sitting there witnessing plasma come down to these obelisks, and think about how mesmerizing it would have been. And if you were an elite back then, like a shaman or a king or a prophet, and you knew that this was just basic science, you would use technology, just basic technology like that, positive and negatives to attract lightning, and you could make people think you were powerful. At some time, somebody got mad and destroyed some of these things, and I think it was people, and then also some of the cycles were so strong that the plasma would have destroyed some of these things because, sometimes there was more electricity or other. So like we might not see nothing now. And it's funny you said that about Mercury too, about the CMEs, because a lot of people don't know. It's about, very often a giant CME comes off the sun and just misses us. All the time, it just misses us. Matter of fact, just a few months ago, one came blowing by Earth and it just missed us. But if it would have hit Earth, we'd all be extinct right now.
Yeah, and that came from the backside of the sun, too. See, people don't talk about that. That flare was not from the front of the sun. It was so big that it blew off the backside and it wrapped around and still was that powerful.
Yeah, we think about the Carrington event. That was just a little bitty thing, and it was freaking people out there. Imagine you're sitting in a building and all of a sudden the walls catch on fire.
Because I do believe that, after these events happen, there's going to be a resonance, light frequency in the different mineral composition of the Earth's crust. So when you talk about St. Elmo's fire, okay, that's a very basic definition of it. But I don't think you're going to have to be a shaman to see the ley lines glowing after these types of events. I think each one of the elements has a different light frequency with it. So you're talking about gold in the crust, perhaps it's going to come out as a very bright purple. And maybe silver will come out as a very bright white. There's going to be a luminescence left over for years, if not decades after that. Now, in the beginning, it's going to be real intense. It's going to be like a geyser. It'll be actually shooting out of the Earth's surface anywhere from, tens of feet to several miles above the surface, depending on how deep and how heavy the mineral deposit is. And you'll be able to look at that line in the sky or coming out of the Earth and go, whoa, look at that. You say, but as the electricity dissipates and the charge dissipates over time, give it 10 years or a year or two, whatever, that's going to come back down toward the Earth's surface and actually be at the surface level. So Maybe you'll even see like a purple line on the earth, or you'll see a white like halo line across things. This is where a lot of these legends are coming from, is they're looking at the light resonance left over from these discharges on the planet. Because I think a lot of these, petroglyphs that we're seeing across, if you could ignite them, they didn't have colored pigment to really leave the color that it was. I wish they could have, because there would not be all a uniform color from all those petroglyphs. They'd be completely different colors. And who's to say not that centipede coming down, that each one of those legs is in a different color coming down as well. Got a purple, white, red, dark purple, light purple, red, deep red, light red. And they got the whole centipede moving. Can you imagine that with like 50 different colors coming off what looks like feet coming out, but they're more like dragon feet coming out as electrical spirals or electrical filaments off at the end, and 50 different kinds of colors coming off this thing crawling through the sky. Dragons. Yeah, exactly. That would be a little freaky, but you couldn't put the color to it. So what we see is just like a monochrome. It'd be like a black and white photo. It just, it doesn't. I think we're about to see legends repeated here coming up. And again, the elite are just like, we can't save anybody. It's going to be like this. All right, let them argue amongst themselves. We'll give them a bunch of excuses to keep them distracted and fight each other while we're scarfing up the rest of the resources. We've already crossed that point, and if you haven't realized that, I'm sorry, you're just not looking at the bigger picture. That point has been crossed now where any government body is going to do is make us argue amongst ourselves, fight amongst ourselves, while behind us, they're scarfing up 90+% of the resources for their survival or whatever it is, continuity. That's the plan from now to 2024, and that's why I keep talking about, it sounds like I'm repeating myself too many times, with the magnetic coupling of these four gas giants creating a second magnetic field that hasn't happened in 2,000 years. We're about to repeat a 2,000-year cycle where there's going to be massive earth changes. Now again, with caveat, that's only on the physical level. But in the spiritual level and the vibrational frequency level, we have a chance to expand as well. As we're into a 2,000-year cycle, we're talking about Christ and the foretelling of beware of the water bearer. But again, you could look at this in two ways. Okay, maybe that was the earth changes side. But the magnetic frequency changes in the brain, the way we perceive reality, and the manifestation capabilities. So this is the scariest thing for me too, is I understand right now that our manifestation capabilities are increasing exponentially daily. But the media and all this fake news and all this kind of stuff is pushing you into the negative. Instead of bringing us into this hopeful time where we could come into this golden light instant manifestation, all the betterment of humanity type of manifestation that we need on this planet right now, it's being redirected into this more dense manifestation faster for the human, but in the negative, like this drawing down to the darker energy side of everything's going wrong, everything's going to collapse, everything is this, everything is that, oh my God, it's going to. But that's resonating across the planet at a faster rate and a denser rate and a more quickening rate of bringing it into physical reality. Versus the other way of, we're into this enlightenment time of anything possible is possible right now, and we should bring it to the light and, for the greater good of humanity, bring us new energy sources. We don't need central banking. We don't need government anymore. We can come off on our own and exist in our own communities without centralized control. But you see where the narrative's going to try to draw that down and manifest something very different. It's like we are being controlled by some simulation here to push us into. I have my own thoughts about how at this particular time, specifically this month and last month, with the Great Conjunction flip over, that Great Conjunction flip over was an energetic marker in time, as you alluded to, but look what flipped at the same time in terms of how the media flipped at that exact same day. And what it's portraying for us to manifest and look at versus what the possibilities are for expansion in our minds and creativity and just bringing the human race to a higher level, an extraplanetary level. Maybe that's what we needed to join the interplanetary body of other, souls out there was this going to the light side versus drawn down to the dark side. I could see why if I was an alien coming down to a planet, if I was an extraterrestrial coming to a planet, I would look at us as just barbaric apes. We have this time right now where we can manifest into this glorious time of light. Yeah, we're squandering it on a bunch of, pandering apes right now. It's unbelievable how this narrative is drawing us into this manifestation on the negative side when it's going into the quickening. We need to go the other direction. We need to go to the light. And do not use violence. That's exactly what they want. So anybody out there, do not go to the Capitol. Do not involve yourself in violence, because that's exactly what they want, to bring you in even deeper darkness. No violence. Only every time somebody sends something negative to you about violence and use violence, you just need to send them, say, no, it's time of love and expansion. Stop that. There has to be light in this. The direction needs to swing. The pendulum needs to go the other direction. Do not use the violence route. It never worked in history. The only reason it worked in history was to give these elitist powers more control, because you use violence. It's got to come the other way. It's got to be peace, love, light, vibration. It's got to be a vibration frequency of everybody starts to think, this is no longer acceptable. We got to do it a completely different way without violence. We got to go this way for it. I'm going to stop rambling again, man. I just get lost in these tangents. My brain runs too mad. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, you're, absolutely right. And that's why I tried to bring the analogy tonight of energy trapped, energy stored, and energy released. As you're alluding to, they're trying to distract you with all this negative energy so that you will store it. And we need to go the other direction, and actually not even being like, trying to push Christianity. I'm not actually a Christian, but when you think about that story of Jesus, just the whole story basically, it's a story of somebody that's storing positive energy, and they're going around and they're releasing that energy. And whether fabled or real, the story of Jesus was the story of a human being that stored a lot of energy. And they put a lot of esoteric stuff in there, He was 33, top of the pyramid, full of the energy, enlightenment in the flesh. And that's when they released his energy. Now, you could look at that a couple ways, but you can't argue whether it's a story or real. That energy went on to be released for thousands of years until we're here now. That's a good, parable about storing energy, and the same thing is true now. You hear a lot of people saying being Christ-like, and basically what they're kind of saying in their own way is you got to release the right kind of energy. So no violence. Violence is a negative energy, and it's a feedback loop. You get things that make you mad and you want to release it, and then you spread it in the same way as with kindness, or growing food, or accumulating knowledge, or whatever it is. It's if you're constantly storing positive energy, you're able to release it in a positive way at a positive time. And it's a feedback loop also. So you spread that little bit of kindness, you spread that little bit of knowledge. That person now has that stored energy, and they want to go out and use it, and they want to go out and spread it. And as long as that's not negative energy, when it's released, it's a good thing. And what we've been talking about this whole show is how the big cycles are about to, show you all this energy that's been trapped, hidden information, cycles in the earth that's all going to release in due time, because all energy escapes. You can never trap it permanently. That's an impossibility.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Christ consciousness, but when you look back in different realms and different eras of time, you look back into the Buddha, and you find that very same thing. And if you look back into the Indian Vedas, you find Krishna. And you talked about Quetzalcoatl there for a minute in the Mayan traditions. We don't know much about the Olmecs, but obviously they had some deity figure as well. But what really, gets me is when you go back further than, say, 2,500 years, you get back into the planets as being the rulers of the divinity. You got Saturn, you got Jupiter, Zeus, and all these. But what was before that? Because you talked about the Baltic Sea flooding. I think that was an Earth crust thing that we're going to experience here in 2024. Some areas of the Earth are going to raise, other areas are going to lower, some water bodies will be trapped, new areas will become seas, some areas will become flooded, other areas will drain. And a lot of stuff's going to get covered in mud and sand. But going back to that era, it's called the Chalcolithic. And what they have found in these underwater, no less, 15 to 20 feet underwater across the Baltic region is, machine-tooled, perfect spherical jewelry amok. And things that's so far unexplained that they really don't want to put it out into, say, normal historical timelines. They had machine tools 6,000 years ago. To the Chalcolithic era, in that same flooding time, off of Israel as well, they had an enormous amount of cities right along Israel. Look, about 40 feet of water. And also, incredibly, you can't explain the tooling of the objects at the time. Why is there no deities associated with that time? Except there was an animism, paganism, blah, blah, blah. But then there's really no names for the pagan, like Gia or whatever. Why is it such a one-all catch-all for that? So there's always a consciousness associated with different ages about every 500 years. But as soon as you go back 2,000 years, you got to go into the Greek, the Roman, and then what are you into? You're into like mysticism and worshiping the trees? Come on, really? You have the full Chalcolithic era 6,000 years forward and all these amazing gold tooled and machine-tooled pieces of stone across the place, and you can't even tell us one deity that existed. There's a huge disconnect. We get like a few thousand years of history, but the other 8,000 years from the last interglacial, there has to be all these consciousnesses that are rolling through in these different cycles. You alluded to that one that's held for these last couple thousand years, but there's others as well that are kind of overlapping in cycles themselves. But what was that consciousness of light and love from 6,000 years ago that's still with us again? Is it coming back, or do they not want us to know it's coming back because it's so powerful? Because there's a duality right now, this battle between dark and light. You might call it an information war, but it's a frequency war. Dark versus light, I see what they're talking about now.
Yeah. It's obvious that this cycle of hiding stuff has been around for a long time. And I want to kind of leave you with this. Look at all the oldest megalithic stuff around the world, and none of it had writing on that. Why not? Because whoever built that technologically advanced stuff didn't want common man to know about it. And I think that's somewhere along the lines where the original story of Prometheus came from. You had a group of people with knowledge, they had stored energy, and they had a group of people lacking of that knowledge, and they didn't want them to have it, so they didn't let them have a writing system at that time. Now, something changed along the way where that stopped, and then they just started hiding the writing, which tells me that a change in management happened a long time ago. Whoever the original builders were didn't leave their writing systems down anywhere, and it's kind of going that way right now. They're hiding all of the information, and like we were talking about, I bet there's a codex somewhere in somebody's possession that tells you, hey, when Mercury and Jupiter and Saturn are all in the same place in the line, that'll be the mark of, this or that happening. And that's exactly what's going on right now. They're going out of their way to distract you so you don't figure out things on your own and you don't accumulate power or energy in the form of knowledge and, practices, growing and being self-sufficient. That's the main thing that all powerful people are scared of. Because there really is no reason that almost all of the powerful people seem to be people that hide knowledge. And the reason for that is because all positions of power are occupied by evil men. Because a righteous man, it never crosses his mind to accumulate power over people. They only want to put power in nature or power in knowledge and, lift up other humankind along with them. That's obviously not what our controllers want, though.
Government 101. As I move through the changes here. Yeah, thank you so much for listening tonight to what we both had to say. It's about the energetic change happening, not about the politics. The politics is the distraction. Look at the energetic changes and think about the self-sufficiency where you're going with what can you bring it to next year, not just, using up your canned food. How can you work with others to create a community that can bring something into next year and then the next year as a self-sufficient body? Your clan, if you will. A Ransomware at 420 TV. Ransom, what's happening with your channel now? You were banned again, and then what's happening?
Yeah, well, I got up that new channel up to about 1,000. They banned that one. And I haven't even loaded any new content. I was just loading old content from the other channel that was okay before. So that shows you the level of Orwellianness that we're going through. That, this time I got banned for a rap song that I made a remix of, and they said it was violent content. What's so funny is that rapper is a famous rapper and has a YouTube channel with a video that's more violent than the one I made. I was just putting my own spin on it, and evidently art is now being attacked. Sarcasm is being attacked. Your belief in your religions are being attacked. Belief in reality, the way you see it, is being attacked. You will not have an opinion unless it's given to you. And that's why you got to start educating yourself and teaching your family, and teaching your friends, and keeping this energy stored with the right people so that they can release it in the right way at the right time.
I'll bring you back to the beginning of the show and ask you, what are you thankful for this year? What have you manifested in your life that you think is a beautiful thing, that you're so happy and so grateful that it makes you smile and get a burst of energy out of your heart because something in your life right now is so beautiful, so wonderful. You're so happy and so grateful that you have it. You're like, oh, I'm so thankful. So thank you so much for this thing right here, right now. Whatever it is for anybody out there, just focus on that for a minute. Just truly we're ready to go. And thanks for listening tonight. I'm David Devine, Madame 2030, and Ransom Godwin 420 TV. Remus Films on the prior channel. Who knows where we're going in the future? But anyway, again, stay away from the violence. That's what they want you to get into, and these elitists and global powers to try to implement more change. If we all say no, those plans stop in about 1/5 of an 1/8 of a second. So restrain your emotions, focus in on the mind. See you next week.
Dr. Shubi Scalpel. More now on the breaking news.